Spurgeon here with RevZilla, and I'm back in the garage and I'm doing some maintenance work to my KTM 1090 Adventure R. Now, I'm bringing you along because I figured this would be a great opportunity to talk about some key maintenance areas that require additional attention if you're riding your ADV bike off-road. Now, anytime you're working on your bike, you want to start with the factory service manual. But the problem is, the factory service manual in this case, from a maintenance perspective, was really written to focus on people that are spending the majority of their time on the street with their large ADV bike. Now, if you're like myself and you like to get nice and dirty, there are going to be 5 key areas that require more attention, and that's what we're going to dive into in this video. Now, my 1090, that's going to be our example bike. But regardless of what motorcycle you're riding, this information is going to hold true to your ADV bike as well. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So one of the main areas that you want to focus on with your adventure bike is going to be your air filter. Now, according to the KTM manual, I only need to check my air filter every 9,300 miles. As you can see, this filter is actually pretty gunked up, and I've only got about 1,000 miles on this. So if you are riding in really aggressive off-road conditions, especially dusty ones, you're going to want to check your air filter a lot more regularly. I would say every about 1,500 to 2,000 miles, or after an especially dusty ride. Now, with my 1090, I've actually upgraded to the Rottweiler intake kit, but before I made this upgrade, I was running a high performance air filter. Now, the main reason for this is that if you're trying to replace your air filter every 1,500 to 2,000 miles, that can get really expensive. So I would definitely recommend upgrading to an air filter that can be cleaned regularly. There's also some pre-filter kits out there for you. So if you have any questions as to which kit is right for your specific bike, feel free to throw those in the comment section below, and I'm happy to dive in a little bit more in detail. But if you're riding your adventure bike off-road, check your air filter more regularly. Tire tread is extremely important when you're riding off-road. If you look at the TKC80 up top, that's the wear bar. I have plenty of traction left to ride this tire on the street. However, off-road, I was losing traction completely at the rear wheel, and finally I got stuck really bad by myself when I was riding off-road in New Jersey, and I knew it was time to change the tire. You do not want to wait until you have no grip at the rear wheel and you're stuck in the swamps by yourself to change your rear tire. I can promise you that. You'll notice with the TKC80 on the bottom, you have a lot more mechanical grip out of this tire. This is pretty much a new tire, and that's what you want your tread to look like. So don't wait, even if you're getting traction on the street, don't wait until your tire starts to wear down to the wear bar before you're swapping them out. Same note with the wheel bearings. The 1090 calls to have the wheel bearings checked around every 9,300 miles. I actually ended up swapping mine out around the 6,000 mile mark. The street, I get tens of thousands of miles out of a set of wheel bearings. With all the water crossings, especially in some of the brackish water that we have in Jersey, you're gonna blow through these a lot quicker. So just make sure you're checking your wheel bearings more regularly. Riding off-road requires a lot more use of your clutch. That extra use of the clutch puts a lot more wear and tear on your engine oil. Think about it, when you're riding down the street, you clutch in, clutch out to shift gears. When you're riding off-road, you're using that clutch to manipulate power and regain traction at the rear wheel. And in low speed maneuvers, with a lot of these bikes that have taller gearing, you're using that clutch to really get through tight areas. So all that extra clutch use is going to put an extra wear on that engine oil. So even though the owner's manual for this bike says that I should be changing my oil every 9,300 miles, which is quite a lot of miles on one oil change, I like to change it every 2,000 to 2,500 miles, depending on how I'm using the bike, at least once a year. I would say a good rule of thumb is if you're not racking up that kind of mileage in a year, change at least once a year, or take whatever your recommendation is in your owner's manual and cut that in half. I mean, changing your oil is cheap insurance to make sure you're not doing an engine rebuild later down the line. Sand and dirt is extremely abrasive, and it's going to take a toll on your drivetrain and your brakes. So you need to make sure you're checking those components more frequently. Now, pretty much for every ride, you should be cleaning and lubing your chain afterwards. It's going to help to elongate the life of your chain and sprockets as much as possible. Even then, I'm seeing 15 to 20,000 miles out of some of my street bikes. On my adventure bike, I'm getting about 6,000 to 8,000 miles out of a set of chain and sprockets. Now, for my small bike, my 350, I can sometimes go through a chain and sprocket set to a season. If you take a look at the front sprocket off my 350, it's got about 25 hours on it, and it's already pretty much shot compared to the new sprocket, which is in my right hand. So just keep that in mind as you're out there riding. Make sure you are cleaning and lubing your chain and sprockets as much as possible. So the final area for you to consider is your suspension. Now, according to my KTM owner's manual, it just says I should be looking for leaks every 9,300 miles. That's a bit vague. So I reached out to someone who's a bit more of an expert in this area than I am, Evan from Solid Performance. Now, Solid Performance is a KTM and WP service center, and they have a reputation as being suspension experts. They service suspensions for riders all around the world. When I asked Evan what his recommendation would be, he said, man, you really have to consider that if you're riding a lot off-road, you're putting a lot more wear and tear on your suspension than just riding on the street. Think of all the sand whoops and the rock gardens and the jumps and the hits that you're taking. It helps to wear out the internal fluids and bushings a lot quicker. So his recommendation for all of you out there would be to have your suspension serviced around the 10,000 mile mark. So actually what spurred this conversation was a couple weekends ago, I was out riding and I went to adjust my rebound damper and I noticed it had frozen. And he was like, man, that's a perfect example of, you know, what happens when you're riding a lot off-road. He's like, you probably went through one too many water crossings and it just kind of caused that a little bit of wear and tear that you wouldn't normally see on the street. So I'm actually going to pull the suspension off and have it serviced, both the shock and the fork, and I'm not even at 10,000 miles yet. Now, once I get that back and I put everything together, the final real piece here for you to consider is to make sure that when you're replugging all those electrical connections, they are nice and clean. I know that I was taking the tank off to check the air filter. I noticed a lot of grime and buildup in some of the electrical connections, so make sure you're checking and cleaning all those as you reassemble your bike. So there you have it. I had a great time having you folks hanging out in my garage today. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself as well, and maybe you even learned something about maintaining your adventure bike. Now, if you have additional questions, regardless of whether they're about adventure bikes that are currently on the market or maybe some maintenance questions specific to your bike, throw them in the comment section below and I will do my best to make sure that you get an answer. Now, keep in mind, you want to subscribe to us at RevZilla to keep up with all the content we're rolling out, from larger studio productions to some of these little handheld operations in our personal garages. We've got plenty of content to keep you entertained. I want to thank you for joining me today in my garage. I had a great time. I'm Spurge. Enjoy the ride.